want to introduce our first speaker, Amy Roberts, the Senior Director of Brand Impact and Corporate Social Responsibility at the North Face and the former Director of the Outdoor Industry Association. Now, I've had the pleasure of chatting with Amy and her colleagues a number of times this summer about a generous grant program the North Face created and that you'll hear more about very soon. And I've always thought of the North Face as a brand with a true sense of its responsibility as a social actor in the outdoor space. And this year, they've really taken their role to the next level, pivoting their Explore Fund to meet the moment. One way that happened, this summer, the North Face donated $20,000 to New Mexico's Outdoor Equity Fund, the state's unique grant program to get young, underserved New Mexicans outside. We'll hear more about that program tomorrow morning, but for now, I'll say that the North Face's donation enabled us to reach an additional 4 programs and 525 kiddos. That includes the Karuna Colectiva, a work-learn environment for Indigenous youth. I want to take just a minute here to give you a snippet of how they describe their goals with the programming that the OEF invested in. We enhance the youth's autonomy, creative skills, health and success through holistic practices and traditional culture. We'll connect Indigenous youth back to the water by taking bike rides along the Bosque trails. We educate on the vital necessity of natural environments that are rooted in our cultural identities. Bicycling is an act of resistance in the climate crisis. Our participation as leaders and guides will help Indigenous youth know the value of their tribal identity and its relevance to the natural world. So thank you, Amy, for helping make work like that possible. And that goes both for the generous donation from the North Face and the Outdoor Equity Fund support, and for your willingness, of course, to join us here today. So one logistics note before I turn it over to Amy, she has a presentation to share with us, and we will save time for questions at the end of the event. If you have a question, please type it in the question box to the right of your screen. I'll be monitoring that, and we'll try to address at least a few before we wrap up at 3:15. Thank you so much.
There was a good introduction of me, and I just want to talk a little bit about the North Face's program, and specifically, some people might know that before this, I worked at the Outdoor Industry Association. So I had the opportunity to actually be a part of establishing the outdoor offices of recreation. And one of the things that was most inspiring to me about working on this program was the opportunity to actually see the state offices, come to life. And so I wanted to talk about how that came to play in this time at the North Face. So overall, I'll talk a little bit about brands in 2020 and some of the things that might be interesting to you, I hope, today. And of course, it's been a challenging time for all of us, and brands have really had to think through the different challenges, but also other than selling products to get outside, how do we actually think about being a contributor to the overall societal needs at this time? So I just want to talk through some of those things that have gone through our mind, some of our thought processes at the North Face during this time, but also some of the ways that some of the communities that we have been a part of, especially the communities that support outdoor recreation, have been impacted, and some of the unique programs that I've seen the communities put together that you might think about for your own cities. So of course, when coronavirus hit, one of the big issues that became apparent right away was that a lot of the communities that depend on outdoor recreation and depend on tourism, and I have just some headlines here, were immediately impacted because they had to shut down basically tourism industries. So, in the March shutdown, we saw ski areas close, restaurants, hotels, people's campgrounds, that their plans for the spring and summer were immediately disrupted, as well as even guide services. And it was a little bit of a double-edged sword because at the same time, while that was hurting business to shut down, a lot of communities that support an outdoor recreation tourism economy also didn't want visitors in town because they didn't want the virus to spread into their communities, and they were definitely not equipped to handle the healthcare needs that a surge would mean. So a lot of communities might have 10 hospital beds and maybe 1 ICU bed. So it was a little bit of trying to deal with the economic fallout while also managing the healthcare crisis. So a lot of our conversation initially at the North Base was how can we be a part of supporting the communities that actually make outdoor recreation possible in a way that we hadn't really thought of and haven't been forced to think about. And we have a fund called the Explore Fund, which has been in place for 10 years, and it's really our philanthropic arm at the North Base. And to this date, it's mostly given money to conservation or maybe to build new parks and trails. We have a big initiative to build climbing walls in cities. And so we actually took the opportunity to think about, well, in this crisis moment, like how do we shift those dollars and how do we actually, in the immediate term, in the weeks and initial months of the COVID impact, go in and rethink about how we're giving money away. And then how do we also inspire our community? And so it's really our consumers, our customers, to think about like what are the things that they can do and actions they can take. So we have this campaign called United to Move the World Forward, but we really needed to think about how to execute it. So one of the things we put out is just what's the first step forward in this COVID dynamic. And one of the first things we did is really think about like what are the immediate needs, and they were usually around either can we donate money, can we donate PPE to the immediate healthcare crisis? And then also knowing that there were food insecurity issues, both like food banks were, somewhat oversubscribed. So of course, New York was one of the hardest areas initially hit in the country, and we ended up doing a collaboration with Supreme to basically sell like a One World t-shirt that ended up raising quite a bit of money that we just, kept in the New York area. So that was one of our first just ways to actually, in a very quick, grassroots way, raise a bunch of money for New York City. If you're not familiar with Supreme, Supreme has this cult following, I would say, and so we usually when they do collaborations with brands and they have these t-shirts, they usually sell out in like the first 15 minutes. So this is a quick hit for us. The other thing we thought about was how do we do two things. One was around just being a part of helping healthcare workers get needed gowns, whether that was like needed equipment, whether that was gowns, masks, safety goggles, all of that became in short supply, if you remember, in the immediate weeks. So we actually have a partnership already with the Renewal Workshop, which is based in just outside of Portland in Cascade Locks, Oregon. And we donated some material to them and then helped actually fund the Renewal Workshop. And usually Renewal Workshop is repairing North Face and other brand items to resell to consumers. So in this case, they shut down all of that and basically seamstresses at the Renewal Workshop spent several weeks just making gowns and masks for healthcare workers in the kind of greater Oregon area. And then the other thing was we did a partnership with the American Mountain Guides Association, which has been a long partner of our Explore Fund. And we provided a grant to help them move their training that they would have been doing for guides and outfitters out in different recreation areas in the spring and summer to move us online, and then actually start the conversation of when they could return to work responsibly, like how would they advise guides and outfitters to be able to do that, knowing that there would be new COVID restrictions like social distancing, and then also, how would they keep their permits on federal lands current and that type of thing. So we knew that we wanted to give dollars, part of our $1 million commitment to communities around the country that were hit and suffering from the impacts of COVID, but we're not really set up to figure out how to best do that. Sometimes we might work with some communities, but we're really set up more to give money to nonprofits. And so that was really challenging for us. And one of the most exciting things for me that I referenced earlier is that we actually were able to go out and work with the offices of outdoor recreation across the country to help tell us if we were going to deploy money in a state, like where should we give it? And so we weren't busy trying to figure out like where, which communities have the most need or which organizations have the most need. We were actually just able to organize 1 or 2 calls with all the state office directors. I want to give a shout out to Nathan Fay, the state office director in Colorado, for actually helping us set this up. And so late March, or I guess early on in the crisis, in late March and early April, we actually did a call with the state offices and got their advice. And so that made it really easy for us to then immediately have these conversations with different organizations or communities and states and immediately start cutting checks. And this is just a little snapshot of some of the different types of organizations that we gave to. Like the full list is on our website, but it was quite a mix of types of organizations, which goes back to my point of why it would have been really hard for us to figure it out on our own. So I heard in the initial introduction, we did give to the Outdoor Equity Fund. We gave to groups like the American Mountain Guides Association, gave to the tribes in Utah, which were very much hit by the virus. They had some of the highest case counts in the country, and that wasn't as well recognized by people. Gave to food banks, the Lander Community Foundation, and so it was a mix of different types of groups that were serving their communities. And we didn't ask for any reports back or really any much detail on how they were going to use the dollars. Our idea was to just try to get them out as quickly as possible. So I just want to talk about some of the organizations and how they use the money, and it was in very different ways. So the Outdoor Equity Fund in New Mexico really was focused on the mental health impacts of what it meant for kids, especially to feel the isolation of not being at school, not able to see their friends, recognizing the outdoors was something that people really did turn to look forward to family time as a way to get outside your house but still stay safe. And so we gave a grant there that actually was aimed at taking kids under 18 outside, being able to do activities during this time. The second one was really a couple interesting things. One is that search and rescue immediately was impacted, and so despite efforts for people to stay recreating close to home and not go on bigger trips during this time, and on the good side, like a lot of people did see solace in the outdoors, and so we saw the surge in bike sales. People were buying equipment, they were getting out and camping, but also maybe getting in some trouble. So search and rescue actually needed some dollars to just try to deal with the influx that happened out into the backcountry. So there were organizations, Colorado, we did a search and rescue grant in King County in Seattle. And then we had another interesting grant that came through where we worked with Oregon Parks and Recreation, which is a statewide organization in Oregon that Kaylin had recommended from state office there. Supports community parks, so it could be city or county parks. And they were shut down for a while, but when they reopened, they had a shortage of PPE, but they also just needed to provide training to their staff around how you would safely reopen parks. So they actually took our grant and then did a grant program internally that you can see announced here, where they gave dollars to different local park districts around their state. And then one of the programs that I thought was the most creative, and it was actually the initial grant that we gave, was the Sierra Business Council, really ranging from like Lone Pine or Bishop area in the Eastern Sierras in California, all the way up through Mammoth, went out and created what they call the Sierra Resilience Fund. And the fund is pretty interesting because it's created in times of COVID, but it's made to be sustainable into the future. And so it was created initially, and it takes actually both donations and actually investments by certified investment companies, where they are actually collecting these dollars and then distributing them to businesses in the community that needed immediate assistance, so that they could continue to pay workers and stay open, or at least plan to reopen during the time they were closed, but without losing their staff or perhaps not being able to pay their rent. And they really did a grassroots fundraising effort. So they had, like in Colorado, we have Colorado. For the community, and they set up a whole website online. So you could go online and request assistance if you needed a loan, or you could go and invest in the fund and either make a donation, like I said, or actually have an investment contract. And then they offered really three things. One was capital. So if you were a small business and you asked for a loan, you could get that loan to help really get you through the crisis. And then you could also, other businesses actually signed up to be coaches, so that it created this community in that bullet 3. So you could sign up and lend your time as a coach to help build community, so that each business was feeling supported and actually had best practices from other businesses about how to get through the initial crisis and then reopen. And you can see this is the areas that they worked in, and then this is kind of what the website looked like if you wanted to go on and donate, lend, or become a coach. And then most recently they published, I think they've done around 25,000 in loans, but they actually have to put up around 22 stories on that website currently that just talk about success stories from the program. And a lot of it was some of the things they funded were after they got through the initial crisis, were some of the things we see restaurants doing now, like funding the ability to expand to outdoor seating. Some businesses actually partner to create programs where you're marketing each other's businesses, that type of thing. And the thing that's really interesting about the Resilience Fund is their plan is to continue to have it exist now as a permanent fixture within the Sierra Business Council as a part of building their small businesses in that area of California. So I just wanted to touch on 2 other things and then be happy to answer any questions that you might have. The other thing that we did see and felt like we had a responsibility to have a voice in, along with a lot of other brands. So actually, we were just part of this, but a group organized that's called the Recreate Responsibly Coalition. And it's actually made up of about 750 nonprofits, outdoor businesses, land managers, really developing best practices for helping people recreate outside in a way that meets social distancing guidelines, but also raising awareness of just the impacts of the increased desire to get outside, and really even simple leave no trace principles, how to be inclusive and welcoming all people to the outdoors, encouraging people to explore locally, and then just things to know before you go. And really, it's a pretty cool website, and it's just helping people who maybe are thinking about recreating locally, who haven't been doing that, or maybe are just now starting to get outside, that outdoors hasn't been part of their life. How do you learn how to camp responsibly, or where you might go, or how to make a reservation, or how to actually get off the beaten track if you want to try to escape some of the crowd. So his coalition did a big campaign, first around Memorial Weekend, and then again around Labor Day, just talking about the importance of recreating responsibly, and so getting people to take ownership around that. And then, of course, big conversation is about like the election coming up in just 4 weeks now. And so a lot of the brands, including us, have been thinking about, what's our role if we have one in the election and encouraging democracy. So we actually launched a campaign that started around August 18th, which was the anniversary of women's suffrage, and then at the 100th anniversary, and then has been running really through the end of September, and has really been focused on encouraging people to get registered to vote and make sure that they take all the steps that are needed to get registered, and thinking through in this time whether they are going to go to the polls or do they want to get an absentee ballot. We did a partnership with the federal government that was focused on, actually there's a shortage of poll workers in a lot of areas this year. Most poll workers are 65 and older, and so that's also a group that might not feel as comfortable serving as a poll worker this year. And so there's actually a lot of effort nationwide to get younger people to register to become poll workers, both because of COVID, but also just to have a sustainable source of people coming in. It's actually a paid position. So, and then what we did is we used our athletes. So here we have Erica Flowers, who's a trail runner with an orange face, and then Conrad Aker, and had conversations with different advocacy groups around getting registered to vote. And then we also talked about issues that we've advocated on for a long time. And so whether that's working on the Arctic refuge, or talking about climate change, some of the issues that we've been a part of for several years. So those are just some of the things brands have been doing to try to be good citizens and contributing during this time. So yeah, I just wanted to share that, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. What a great presentation. And it's really inspiring to see just the breadth of the work that the North Face is doing. And yeah, we have about 12 minutes for questions, and we have some good ones that have come in. So I'm going to start with this one from Nate Begay. He writes, oftentimes for low-income youth, the biggest obstacle to engage in the outdoors is a lack of access to proper outdoor gear. What do you see the North Face's role in this issue in particular, and how can we work together to get more kids in the outdoors?
Yeah, so the Explore Fund's been in place for 10 years, and my colleague Eric Raymond runs it. And he, I have to give him credit because I just joined the brand actually a year ago. But that's a big issue, the gear issue. But I would say even equally important is having a mentor and a program in your community that you can actually get outside, so you can learn how to do things, but also just friends to go with. So what we've taken the strategy, which lots of other brands have as well, which is to give dollars into local community groups that then take kids outside. So it is both equipment donations, but a lot of times it is more of a financial donation, because the other big barrier sometimes can be just transportation. So that is definitely where in normal times most of our Explore Fund money goes in that direction.
We've seen that with the Outdoor Equity Fund too. There are a number of programs that put together applications based on lowering barriers in transportation. That was one that came up often. And then gear too, frankly. We had one applicant pitch an idea to provide fly fishing gear to kids so that they could have that kind of long-term access to that particular activity. So I think I see both, and yeah, thank you for that, Amy, and thank you for the question, Nate. Now we have another one, maybe from a young person. What advice do you have for students in high school interested in getting involved in outdoor advocacy?
Well, that's an awesome question. So I would say sometimes that we focus on the presidential election or who your senator is or your member of Congress, because those are the top of the ticket candidates and might take a lot of the media's time. But actually, a lot of funding, and I would say almost not the majority, but a significant amount of funding actually comes from local communities. So a lot of times on your ballot, you'll see initiatives to raise dollars for local parks and trails, and sometimes it could be a percentage of the sales tax, or you'll see a property tax levy. And the other issue is that a lot of candidates, a lot of how your community gets developed is dependent on your city council or your county commission or the mayor. And that is a way I think that students can get involved. So it could be working on a ballot initiative in your community that's asking people to think about, voting to increase the number of trails. There's usually a group in your community that's organizing an effort around that. You could volunteer to make phone calls, volunteer to go door to door, distribute flyers. So there is a lot of grassroots opportunity. That's where I would say that you should look is, some of the local elections, and that's a way to get involved. And then, of course, it's very easy now to follow groups like Outdoor Industry Association and look at, or like Trust for Public Land, and look at some of the legislative initiatives that impact outdoor recreation that could be happening at the federal level. And you can reach out to your member of Congress and, ask them to support initiatives that are important to you from an outdoor perspective. So I think it really is just taking time to make your voice heard.
I love that. Thank you, Amy, and thank you for the great question. We have a couple more rolling in quickly. This one from a local business owner and founder, Chap Grubb. Will you speak to TNF Renewed? I am curious about how much of a role you see used recycled gear to impact the outdoor industry moving forward. Thoughts about that topic in general?
Yeah, so TNF Renewed is, you can actually go to, we have a website where you can go and buy like renewed apparel, and I see it becoming a bigger part of at least our business. And so it's pretty straightforward. Like sometimes we might have product that comes in that we actually never sell that just needs small repairs. Or we have product that's returned and is damaged in some way that can be repaired. And so what we've done is partner with the Renew Workshop to actually clean the gear and then repair it and resell it. And I think that is going to become a bigger part of how apparel, gear, and footwear companies do business, because just from a sustainability perspective, you want to keep the gear in use as long as possible, and you definitely don't want it to end up in landfill. And so TNF Renewed is definitely a growing part of our business. We launched it in 2018, and we've continued just to build it out each year. And then one kind of interesting note is that usually we also do some interesting collections where we've taken like maybe a jacket that somebody had for a long time, or two jackets that were really damaged, and actually made them into one. So you end up with this unique piece that isn't like anything else. It's just a custom made piece. And that's actually been really popular. Like we've actually auctioned those off to kind of raise awareness of the idea of using, or the idea and the cool factor behind actually wearing something that's not new. And those are usually really in high demand. So I do think if you look at some of the research with millennials and Gen Z, there is more interest in actually buying lightly used or repaired products.
That was one of the more exciting developments in the outdoor industry when I was working at Outside Magazine, to see the launch of that program at the North Face and some of these other used gear initiatives. Like, I love it from the sustainability angle, and then also as like an avid outdoor recreationist, I feel like we create these stories around our favorite pieces of gear, and they can become like almost mythical, or like almost a member of the family. So I love the energy to keep it as new as one can, and keep being able to use it. Pretty special. Now, let's see, you probably have time for one more question, and then we'll just leave a few minutes for you for any closing remarks you might have, Amy, and thank you again so much for joining us today. This last question. So the attendee asks, New Mexico is home to the world's first ski area B Corp, Taos Ski Valley. What are the benefits or challenges of making such a public statement about a company's commitment to advancing the social and environmental good? What kind of responsibility comes with that?
Well, I would say, of course, I think there's a lot of benefits to putting out aspirational goals like that. And I think it is just being transparent then about your progress. And so, sometimes we might put out goals and we get 90% there, or we have to say, oh, actually that idea just wasn't technologically feasible, or there was actually a better solution that came up. And so I think part of it is just, being clear on the aspirations and goals that you have as a brand, and then being transparent with the consumer about which ones that you've been able to achieve, and where you are in your progress. And from my point of view, that's what the consumer's looking for. And I think the consumer today, whether it's consumer of goods or services, is fairly sophisticated. And so they're understanding, hey, like, this is what this company stands for, and here's where they are. So if anything, transparency is probably the number one thing that I would think about. But I don't see a lot of downside as long as you're transparent about it.
Awesome. And we actually had one more question come in. And we have a few minutes left for it, so let's give it a shot. This person asks, Amy, they say, I am a brand ambassador influencer living in New Mexico. How can I best support my state's outdoor economy? That's a fun one. I appreciate that sentiment.
Well, yeah, I think it's always, there's always this conversation, I think, on Instagram among the influencers about like how much you highlight different places, and does that create, overcrowding in certain areas. And I do think that while we do have some places in the country that you go to and maybe the trailhead is really crowded, it is a big country, and we still have maybe 50% of the U.S. population that doesn't really enjoy the outdoors, or hasn't committed to getting outside or seeing the benefits. So I still think there's a lot of opportunity to welcome more people into the outdoors, and so I think it is showing what New Mexico has to offer. And obviously Instagram does that well through beautiful places that you're able to showcase, but also I think it's an opportunity to partner with organizations in the state that are enabling people to get outside. And so there's just increasing awareness of the opportunity. And then of course, one of the big discussions now, which I think is the other opportunity, which the influencer community on Instagram has been really good about talking about, is just how do we increase the diversity of people who are still welcome in the outdoors and see themselves there. And we have a role to do that as brands as well. So want to make who goes outside look more like what the U.S. population looks like. So I think there's a role there too.
Yeah, we're definitely one of those agencies that would love to partner with people with big Instagram followings who want to promote the beautiful outdoors in New Mexico. So look me up. And I appreciate that. Thank you, Amy. We are just about at time. Are there any other last minute closing comments you make before we enter into a quick intermission?
No, I just thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate everyone's patience with my audio challenge at the beginning. So thank you for hanging in there.
No, it wouldn't be a presentation without some like tech hiccups. So no, all good. And we're just glad that you were able to log on. Thank you so much. We will be recording this entire presentation. We're recording it now, and we'll be posting it on our website once the conference closes. So if you wanna catch up on anything you might have missed, it will all be there. And thank you so much for joining us so far. And huge thank you to our keynote, Amy.